In 1974, Barry White performed for 17,000 people in London. 2 years earlier, he had been calling friends to borrow money to keep the lights on. Nobody in that arena knew how close it had all come to never happening at all. Not close in the way that success stories are described as close, where the obstacle is dramatic and the resolution is inevitable. Close in the way that real things are close to not existing, quietly, incrementally, without fanfare, in a rented room in Los Angeles where the telephone sat on a plain table and the project on that table had no label, no distribution, no manager, willing to bet real money on a large black man, with a voice that everyone in the industry had decided was impossible to market. This is the story of the 2 years between that room and that stage, and what it takes to keep building something when everything around you, the silence from the labels, the empty bank account, the friends who have started to wonder when to stop believing, is telling you that the version of events you are insisting on is not the version that is going to happen. By 1971, Barry White had been working in the music business for nearly a decade. He had not been failing exactly. He had been learning, which is a different thing and a harder one to explain to the people around you when the learning produces nothing visible yet. He had worked as a session musician, as a producer, as an arranger. He had been in the room for other people's records, had contributed to other people's careers, had developed a set of skills and a musical intelligence that were, by any honest assessment, extraordinary. What he did not have was a record of his own, a hit, a name that meant something outside the specific circles of Los Angeles session work. He was 27 years old. He had come out of South Central, out of the gang years, out of the jail cell where an Elvis song had reorganized his life at 16. He had spent 11 years building toward something that had not yet arrived. The money situation in 1971 was specific and unglamorous. He was not dramatically broke in the way that makes for clean storytelling. He was working broke, project broke, the kind of broke that exists when you are spending everything you have and everything you can borrow on something that does not yet have a return. He had a project. 3 young women he had found and believed in, Love Unlimited he was calling them. He had heard something in their voices, in the combination of them, that he was certain about in the way that he had been certain about very few things in his life. The problem was that his certainty was not transferable to the people who controlled the money. He made the calls. He borrowed what he could. He kept going. The music industry in Los Angeles in the early 1970s had a very specific idea of what was marketable and what was not. The idea did not include Barry White. He was large in a business that preferred its performers trim and telegenic. He had a voice that sat in a register nobody had thought to build a career around, too deep for conventional pop, too unconventional for the R&B formats that the labels understood. When he played his demos for the people whose job it was to say yes or no to things, the answer was almost always a version of the same thing. Interesting, but not quite right. But keep in touch. He kept in touch. He also kept working on Love Unlimited. The 3 women who had become both his creative project and, in Glodian James, the person who would eventually become his wife. He was building 2 things simultaneously, the group and the sound that would surround them. The orchestrations he was developing were dense and warm and specific, string arrangements of a complexity that required real players, real studio time, real money that he did not have. He borrowed more. He found a label, a small one, with limited reach but enough infrastructure to get a record pressed and into distribution. It was not the deal he wanted. It was the deal that existed. He took it. The sessions for the first Love Unlimited record happened in the way that most first records happen, in borrowed time, in studios booked at odd hours when the rates were lower, with musicians who were being paid partly in the promise that this was going somewhere real. Barry White ran those sessions the way he ran everything, with absolute certainty about what he was building and absolute silence about the part of him that was doing the arithmetic on whether the building would hold. The Love Unlimited record came out in 1972. It did not set the world on fire. It moved, enough to be noticed, enough to suggest that something was there, not enough to resolve the money situation or convince the larger labels that they had made a mistake by passing. But something had shifted. The record had proven the sound was real, that what Barry White was hearing in his head, the orchestrations, the warmth, the particular quality of intimacy he was trying to build, could be transferred from the room where he imagined it to a piece of vinyl that other people could hold. He started writing for himself. He had not intended to be a performer. He had intended to produce, to arrange, to be the architect behind other people's voices. But somewhere in the process of building Love Unlimited, he had started to hear his own voice differently, not as an instrument that didn't fit the available categories, but as an instrument that required a category that did not yet exist. He began recording his own material in late 1972. The sessions were spare at first. He was working with what he had, which was not much but was more than it had been, because the Love Unlimited record had bought him a small amount of credibility and a slightly larger amount of studio access. He was 38 years old. He had been in the business for 12 years. He had never had a hit with his own name on it. He recorded I'm Gonna Love You Just a Little More Baby in the early weeks of 1973. When he played it back in the control room for the first time, he knew, not with the anxious provisional knowing of someone who hopes they have made something good, with the specific, quiet certainty of someone who has been working toward a sound for a very long time and has finally, in one take, in one session, in one room in Los Angeles, arrived at it. The record came out in the spring of 1973. It went to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, higher on the R&B chart. It was played on radio stations across the country, in cars, in living rooms, in kitchens, in the small private spaces where people receive music when it is not performing for them but simply present with them. The labels that had passed called back. The managers who had not returned his calls returned his calls. The industry that had spent 12 years explaining to Barry White why he was not quite right for the market began, with the particular smoothness of institutions that do not acknowledge having been wrong, to find him very interesting indeed. He did not celebrate in the way the situation seemed to warrant. He went back to work. There was a second record, then a third. The sound he had been building in borrowed studios with borrowed money was now being built in real studios with real budgets and the full infrastructure of a major label behind it. Gene Page, the arranger who had been working alongside him, whose name would appear on every record but who the world would largely fail to notice, helped him build the orchestrations to their full scale. The voice and the strings and the warmth and the weight of it reached people in a way that the industry had said it would not. 100 million times eventually. In living rooms and concert halls and the most private spaces of a generation of listeners who had never heard anything quite like it and did not have a word for what it was doing to them. What it was doing to them was simple. If you trace it back to the room in 1971, where a man sat with a telephone and a project nobody believed in, it was proving that the version of events he had insisted on was the true one. London, September 1974. Barry White walked onto the stage of a sold-out arena and stood in the spotlight in front of 17,000 people who had paid to be there, who had chosen to be there, who had found in his records something worth traveling across a city to hear live. He was 30 years old. It was 3 years since the room with the telephone and the borrowed money. It was 12 years since the jail cell in Los Angeles County where an Elvis song had given him a direction. Nobody in the arena knew those numbers. Nobody in the arena knew about the calls made and the money borrowed and the sessions booked at odd hours when the rates were lower. Nobody in the arena knew about the 12 years of invisible work, the demos that went nowhere, the meetings that ended with the word interesting and no follow-up call. They knew the records. They knew the voice, the depth of it, the warmth of it, the particular quality of intimacy it carried, the sense that the person singing had been somewhere difficult and had come back with something worth giving. What they were responding to, without knowing it, was the distance. The distance between the room in 1971 and the stage in 1974 is not a distance that can be measured in years. It is measured in something else, in the specific quality of refusal that allows a person to keep building toward something when the world's verdict on that project is clear and negative and delivered not dramatically but in the ordinary silence of unanswered calls and past opportunities and borrowed money that is running out. Barry White stood in the spotlight. He had earned the light the way that light is actually earned, not in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 ordinary ones where the choice was to continue or to stop, and he had continued. The audience did not know this, but they felt it. In the voice, in the weight of it, in the specific kind of warmth that only comes from a person who has been somewhere cold. 17,000 people, a sold-out arena, a telephone call in 1971 that made it all possible, because he made it, and then he made the next one, and then he went back to work. That is the whole story, and it is enough. If this story reached you, if there is something you are building right now that the world has not agreed to recognize yet, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want more stories like this, the ones underneath the music, the ones that explain everything, subscribe. There are more to tell.